Straight off the bat, I am not a big fan of BMW motorcycles, but I do call a spade a spade. Matter of fact, in all my 45 years of riding motorcycles on the road, I have only ever owned just the two of them. And not only that, personally, I don't find the styling of a lot of BMW motorcycles all that attractive. To me, some of them are just hideous.
Sorry, bro.
There's no doubt that the BMW R100 RS was the very first sports tourer, and a very significant motorcycle. However, it did have a high-speed stability issue, which was partly due to its handlebar-mounted fairing. BMW addressed this on the R100 RS by using a wind tunnel-designed frame-mounted fairing. This new fairing gave the rider unsurpassed wind and weather protection, as well as creating the downforce needed for high-speed stability. It was, in the 1970s, a masterpiece of fairing efficiency. Although it wasn't the first production motorcycle to have a full fairing, which is often incorrectly reported. This honour belongs to the MV Agusta 750S. But there was much more to the R100 RS than just a great fairing. There was a solo seat available, which was scoffed at by many at the time as being a seat and a half, because it was longer than a traditional solo seat. This seat, however, enabled the rider to slide backwards and comfortably tuck in behind the fairing whenever they wanted to. Its handlebars were also very narrow and low, for a reason. While this created a somewhat unusual riding posture, it made the rider lean forward closer to the fairing. So the fairing actually worked, unlike many bikes you see these days, which have the screen so far in front of the rider that at normal riding speeds, the wind blast comes over and around the screen in a turbulent fashion, which makes the wind blast much worse, not better. The early models were fitted with spoke wheels and had a rear drum brake, while from 1978 they had alloy wheels and a rear disc brake, and they produced 70 horsepower. In the mid-1980s, the twin rear shocks were replaced with a monoshock, and these later models only produced 60 horsepower due to the tightening of emission and noise regulations. The bike had an extremely long production period, from the 1970s into the 1990s. Although it featured updates and improvements on pretty much every model year, the basic overall design and concept never changed during that period. Its engine, throughout the whole period, was of course BMW's relatively unsophisticated 980cc horizontally opposed twin-cylinder four-stroke, what is commonly referred to as a boxer engine. These boxer engines did vibrate and shake to some degree, but it was never obtrusive, and for me they have a very soothing feel and sound. And having an unsophisticated engine, which is straightforward and simple in design, is not a bad thing, as you can do all the maintenance and work on the engines yourself at home, as long as you have some half-decent mechanical knowledge. Sure, they didn't have the neck-snapping acceleration of any of the big Japanese fours, such as the Kawasaki GPZ 900, which would cover the quarter mile in 10.9 seconds. The BMW R100 RS was a full 2 seconds slower, with an absolute best quarter mile time of 12.9 seconds, whereas average times were in the low 13-second bracket. But let's just have a listen to that 2-second difference crossing the finish line. Not that much in reality, is it? Indeed, a BMW R100S, which was the predecessor model to the RS, won the Castrol 6-hour-long production bike race in 1977, beating a more powerful and faster Kawasaki Z1B 900, proving yet again that a great motorcycle is not always about having the most horsepower or the highest top speed. The R100 RS's top speed was around the 120 mph mark. If you brag about your bike having a high top speed, I ask you this question. How often do you ride over 120 miles an hour on a public road? The R100 RS was, in reality, plenty fast enough. Their dry weight, depending on the year, was in the vicinity of about 210 to 220 kilos. But because of the very low centre of gravity due to the design of the Boxer engine, the Japanese four-cylinder bikes at the time, which had an equivalent weight, always felt much heavier, because their weight is carried much higher up. The R100 RS handled exceptionally well, had a large capacity fuel tank, and they were economical, giving them a very good fuel range. BMW offered many accessories for the bike, such as hard lockable panniers, a rear rack, and engine protection bars. And under the seat was a very comprehensive toolkit, which included a puncture repair kit, as well as a smaller compartment under the tail section for storing smaller bits and pieces. The bike also featured superb brakes, with the front calipers mounted behind the axle. BMW was one of the first companies to realise the benefits of doing this. It also featured a low-maintenance shaft final drive. Back in the day, there was a lot of prejudice against shaft drive bikes. At the time, shaft drive bikes like BMWs, Moto Guzzi's and some Japanese bikes were often frowned upon by many road testers, because when the power was applied, the bike's rear end lifted substantially. However, as anyone that has ever owned one of these old shaft drive bikes would know, once you got used to it, it wasn't a problem. It was just a matter of adapting. Personally, I just call it character. You could actually use it to your advantage during cornering by gently applying the throttle as you went around the corner, which would increase your amount of cornering clearance. The BMW R100 RS was a masterpiece of motorcycle design and engineering. Whether it is the world's best motorcycle is of course very debatable, because most riders have their own favourite manufacturers and bikes. But if you try to look at the R100 RS with a totally unbiased opinion, it could well be the best motorcycle for everyday use ever made. Anyway, that's my opinion, and I don't even particularly like BMWs. Cheers.